Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have passed our technical issues. Dr. Chappelle, if you would like, you can go ahead and continue. Thank you to our viewing audience for your patience. We just want to make sure you got access to everything.
Thank you very much. The hazard of going first. I will say, I've had a number of people who are concerned about being able to hear the first part. And what we'll do is I will just re-record the presentation and we'll put it on the Durham Pre-K website. And I invite all of you to visit that website for those that are interested in that first part. And of course, the slide deck is also in many ways self-explanatory. So just again, as a summary, remember, we're talking about our local investment primarily, but we're also talking about the whole of our pre-K initiative, which is inclusive of all funding sources. If you'll move the slide deck forward. Keep going. All right, you can stop there for a minute. So again, as we already mentioned, our long-term goal is to hit 75% of the census of 4-year-olds. So we want to have seats available. Certainly, we know some families will never pick a public program, and that's fine. It's always optional. But we have a universal access program in Durham, and our goal is to have enough seats to serve 75% of the 4-year-old census. And although our trajectory since beginning the program has had growth every year, of course, during the pandemic, it slowed to a very low growth rate. Now we're back on track and growing each year. With funding for next year, we hope to hit the 42% mark. Next slide. Okay, so we're back to where we were. Basically, what is important to this group is what our long-term plans are. And we know that our families, based on our supply and demand study that was completed in 2018, where we deeply surveyed families as well as did other investigation of the data available, we know that families want the Durham Public Schools as an option for their preschool program. Some families prefer a private program. So we have a mixed delivery model with our 4-year-olds in licensed 5-star minimum childcare programs with a BK certified teacher in every Durham pre-K classroom, along with a teacher assistant. The issue is that we know that our families want options. We know that Durham is a strong community with wanting to have many choices. And so back in 2019, we did come to this group to say that we were interested in Durham Public Schools making a commitment to, over the long term, to have preschool available in every elementary school. And at that time, the superintendent, Mubanga, made that commitment, and we have continued to work toward that goal. At that time that the supply and demand study was done, we mapped at that time that 20 of 29 elementary schools had preschool classrooms. So that was very good compared to some districts across the state. Presently, we're at 25 of 32 elementary schools with preschool classrooms. So progress has been made. Of course, with the pandemic, the progress hasn't been as fast as we had hoped. At the time in 2019, we had asked the district to commit to having preschool in every elementary school by the 22-23 school year. Obviously, plans change. However, we want to ask that we recommit during these tight financial times, that we recommit to continued growth, because we know that for the long-term good of our community, that there is a lot of argument for having a continuum of service for our elementary school children with preschool at every elementary school. And we hope to continue that commitment. We really hope that the district will come back to the idea of creating a plan, a long-term plan. At that time in 2019, we had asked for a plan that would outline what would be the cost to assure that there were preschool seats available at every elementary school, because obviously there's your operating each year. However, there's work to be done for some of our elementary schools that would need to be retrofitted in some ways to accommodate our 4-year-olds. So we know it's not a simple ask. We know that it is something that represents a big commitment. So we would like during these tough times for our school district to keep that in mind as a priority, as available as possible. In addition, at that time, we asked the district to enter into a study of the possibility of providing some additional transportation. Transportation is obviously very expensive. And in the past, in pre-2018 times, there was some transportation available to 4-year-olds that is not available now. We know that for our families, that transportation is a barrier for some families, and we want to work together to examine it more closely. And that's not something that has been on the agenda in the last few years to really look at, but we want to revisit that. In addition, we really want to revisit the issue of wrap care for our 4-year-old children. As you know, before and after school is a hot button issue across all working families across the state. And for 4-year-olds, it is more complex than our K-8 students that we provide some after school for. So we want to work together to build capacity around wrap care. Our local dollars are paying for some children to have wrap care, and we don't want wrap care to be a barrier to participation for many of our families. We think that the district is key in this, and we feel like right now that there's some work to be done in the wrap care area within the school system. Also, the biggest thing is we really want to recommit to sharing data. This comes up every time I do a presentation. I get asked, well, how are our children doing? And the issue of data sharing is pretty contentious and something that we have to really pledge to work together on. So I'm hoping that we can look at data sharing as a critical piece of how we move our collaboration forward among all our partners. Durham Public Schools being a key partner in that arena. So there are other things that we have to continue to work on together. However, I think that those are the primary areas that we want to really put our energy into and our focus as we move forward. We've got to realize that we've established in Durham, the Durham Pre-K program is unique in that we have a governance committee that sets policies and guides this program, and that the parameters for the program are all based on the evidence we have from research on young children's success. And the governance committee is a strong committee that takes this one issue of access for pre-K as its priority. All of you have many, many competing priorities, but the governance committee is fully focused on our 4-year-olds and creating standards and program guidelines that are going to assure long-term success. So we feel strongly that the Durham Pre-K program, as it is established, is the best guide for our community's success for 4-year-olds. We want to continue our collaboration, work together as key partners. And this is why we advocate strongly for the resources to go through the Durham Pre-K Governance Committee. Not in any way to take away the responsibility of our elected officials for our young children, but knowing that the governance committee has no other job than to work toward making sure the program is high quality and meets the research-based and the evidence for children's success. Okay, next slide. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these demographics because I think it would be more helpful for you to look at the slide deck. And what I will say, though, is that we feel very good about our enrollment in terms of making sure that we're meeting our priority to serve young children with the greatest needs. It is a universally available program, and we are serving quite a diverse group of families with varying incomes. Next slide. So we strongly know that our priorities mean that those children who have barriers for their success, families who don't have as many resources, are absolutely our priority. However, we know that all of our 4-year-olds can benefit from a high quality program. And we work really hard to assure that we have a diversity in our enrollment. Racial diversity, language diversity, income diversity, all pieces, in addition to the fact that we have very diverse environments with our mixed delivery model. Next slide. So just to remind you, I mentioned earlier at the beginning that although this program is almost universally free to families, when a family is at 400% of federal poverty level, we do have a sliding scale fee that gets implemented. It is very modest. And I've had people say to me, why are you doing that? Why doesn't, why don't you have full fee for families who make more? The reality is that our families struggle to pay the cost of high quality childcare. When you think about the cost of childcare and the accessibility of our highest quality programs, most families cannot afford it, even at the higher income levels. So again, once a family hits 400% federal poverty level, we implement the sliding scale. And if they make more, they pay more. But it is still a subsidized program. And just to remind you, the other federal programs and the NC Pre-K program does not even allow children to enroll at those higher income levels. And so unless they have a identified strong developmental need, they cannot enroll in NC Pre-K if family is over 200% of federal poverty. So Durham, we're doing things differently. Next slide. Okay, so again, these are just some more demographics for you. I think the thing that we want you to be aware of is we track everything. So if you have questions, we're always happy to answer them. This one obviously talks about family structure, gender, and home language. Next slide. So I think that one of the things that we get asked a lot is this program really available across Durham? We are still working on assuring that we have accessible locations. Some of it is, of course, driven by our resources. How many seats can we have? But some of this is driven by quality. So Durham County local dollars do invest in building capacity for quality. So the local dollars for Durham Pre-K allow us to work with licensed childcare programs that don't meet the Durham Pre-K standards to provide professional development, quality improvement, and coaching to get them to the level where they do meet the Durham Pre-K standards so they can apply to be a Durham Pre-K site. But even if they don't apply, it helps all our children because it improves that quality. So we're building capacity across Durham, whether a site is Durham Pre-K or not. So this is an important piece, but we do care about where our children come from, what zip code they live in, and that's what this slide reflects. Okay, next slide. I'm going to have you go past this one because we're short on time, but also to let you know, pardon? We're way over time, right? Especially with our break. So I skipped that one. You can look at it. It's basically about the funding and the financing. Our rate comparisons, the reason I have this here is for you to see that the reality of the Durham Pre-K rate is paying more than our childcare subsidy rates, our other rates in the community, because of the requirement that teachers are paid equal to the Durham Public Schools salary scale. In addition, programs have to meet higher standards. Durham Pre-K standards are higher than the state licensing standards for 5-star care. And that costs money, obviously. Next slide. Okay, I'm not going to go over this whole thing. You've heard before about our apprenticeship program. I'm just going to let you know there are quite a few slides in there to give you additional information about the apprenticeship program. But what I'll lift up is to let you know that Durham's Early Childhood Apprenticeship Program is the largest apprenticeship program in North Carolina. It continues to grow. We have a waiting list right now of almost 100 students. We are working hard to bring in outside resources to help cover that. Just got a $70,000 grant, which is a modest grant to help toward that. We continue to work for external funding so that Durham County local dollars are not covering all the costs for the apprenticeship program. But the reason this matters is, as you know, if you can't find a teacher, you're not going to have a quality classroom. And that teaching shortage is extended into our early childhood arena. So even though we pay on the Durham Public School scale, we still struggle to hire BK licensed high quality teachers. The apprenticeship program is a pathway for a career for individuals. This program is for those who've graduated from high school and want to have a free education. Everything becomes free to them if they're in the apprenticeship program, and they make a wage that has a continuum where they have incremental increases the longer they work as an apprentice. It is a mentorship apprentice program, so each apprentice gets a mentor, and that's an important key to that program. So I'm not, as I said, I'm not going to go through the rest. There are 4 or 5 slides that give you additional information about the apprenticeship program. I think the thing that we really need to take away from this is that this investment, Durham Pre-K, has to be nurtured, has to be continued to be prioritized. We all know about the shiny penny. New programs come and new programs go. They're all really shiny when they start. When they're more seasoned, more time has passed, they sometimes lose focus or don't become priority anymore. And our goal is to assure that the absolute 75% goal stays at the forefront of our community. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chappelle. We have long awaited this presentation. It was pushed off from previous meetings, so we appreciate your patience. This work is foundational to everything else that we do and are talking about. And it's really important that we understand more of the details and your recommendations for next steps and all of that as we move forward. So I think we need to hold questions because we are almost at 10 o'clock here. And we do have some more presentations, but thank you very much. And I'm sure if we have additional follow-up, we can contact you directly. And we look forward to keeping a pulse on the pre-K conversation. So next, we will move to our agenda item, the Durham Public Schools budget, and I'll pass it to our interim superintendent, Kathy Moore.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to go through the DPS budget request one more time. I feel like everybody has been paying attention, has seen this about 28 times. Although it is a little different based on the last board action from when you adopted your budget. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. So our desired outcomes for the presentation today is to provide an overview of the 24-25 budget proposal adopted by the board just last week, I believe it was, the final proposal. To provide also an overview of some deferred needs that we've not talked about a lot, but are embedded in our conversations around how we've prioritized our needs. And to provide some examples of some fiscal measures that have been implemented to reduce local expenditures as we move forward. And then to give the opportunity for the board and the commissioners to ask any questions or dialogue regarding the budget proposal, and then just briefly go to next steps. Next slide, please. I keep calling this the money slide. This really is an outline of all of the areas that the board has approved moving forward. It is a summary slide of the local budget requirements in the funding request for the board's approved budget proposal. This has changed a little bit from what was seen at the in the superintendent's proposed budget, namely that the bottom line went from just over $26 million to $27.735 million. The top box in green are things that are legislative mandates that we don't really have control over. They are things that are already baked into the second year of the biennial budget by the legislature, which includes a 5% average salary increase for certified staff, 3% for classified staff, and then associated retirement, FICA, and health insurance increases. That amount is $6.578 million. And I just need to stop and make a note here. We do anticipate, based on conversations we've had with legislators and others, that the second year biennial budget will actually increase compensation for staff. So this amount then will be insufficient to actually implement if the legislature moves to move salaries higher. And it is an election year. So that may actually happen. It's a good problem, but it's something you have to deal with. So.
A few of my folks are asking, and thank you. I hate to put a pause. Quick question. We didn't get it in the email. Is there any way somebody on staff could email this to some of our folks now so they could go along with you? Right. We don't have a hard.
Yeah, it's on the website.
Okay, well,
It's
thank you.
posted.
Okay, no, thank you. We just didn't know.
It was
some
posted
people could go
yesterday.
along. Okay, we didn't get it. Thank you so much.
Okay, so 6.5 million for the legislative items, and that will go up if the legislature increases compensation. There are a couple of proposals, and here is an area where the board added an item to the superintendent's proposed budget. There is an item to increase the local supplement by about $800 a month per teacher. The cost of that would be $3.1 million, as you see there. The item the board added was an additional supplement for difficult to staff positions, particularly in EC and ESL. This is an additional local supplement of around $200 per month for all EC and ESL teachers. And for our teachers that are in self-contained classrooms, that would actually be $350 per month. So that is at a cost of $1.39 million. There is a proposal as well to include master's pay for teachers with a relevant master's degree. This is an area that used to be funded through legislative funds, was cut by the legislature, maybe 2011 or 12. Grandfathered folks who already had a master's or who had started their first course through to a master's, but any subsequent people who have a master's or have hired are not paid for their master's. Causes a real disconnect with staff. Again, this is a conversation that comes up at the legislature every year to restore this across the state of North Carolina. It has not happened. There is one district in the state that has begun and committed to paying master's pay for all teachers with eligible masters. I think several districts are discussing it during this budget season right now, and it is on here as a goal for Durham as well at almost $1.3 million. The compensation study implementation, this is the work that began in the prior, actually couple of years around the vision to bring classified staff to a market rate in Durham. This is for all classified staff. The implementation began this past year, and it really is the source of the greatest frustration and sort of breach of a promise to staff that we have seen in a long time. The financial modeling for what was actually adopted and implemented was insufficient in terms of the amount that it would actually cost. I've said that several times. I think I've practiced it. I dream it. And so in resetting the landscape on what it would actually cost to implement schedules, that we have revised a bit from what was in the initial classified study to reflect a slower pace towards the top of the scale, quite frankly, because some of the scales as you got to the top were exceeding state maximums. So there have been some adjustments to it. But even with those adjustments, the total cost to actually implement that compensation study that was the vision and the promise to our staff is $8.8 million. And I believe in the work with the board to establish priorities for this budget request, the full implementation of the classified study market rate increases is was the top priority of the board. A couple of other additional items that come along with this. As a part of the local budget for DPS, there is a charter school pass-through. These dollars represent about 20% of the local budget. When we increase our local budget, that increases the per pupil on the local level. And about 20% of Durham County students are in charter schools. Legislatively, the local dollar that goes to charter school students that they are due passes through the PSU, which is Durham Public Schools. This 4.253, it reflects the additional dollars that would be needed based on the additional local funds that are being requested. And those dollars would be owed to charter schools, whether it passed through DPS or the commissioners paid it directly. Either way, the charters are getting that amount of funding. There's also a request in this budget for $716,000 for additional pre-K seats. That's 45 seats for 3 classrooms at Murray-Massenburg. The capacity of the 3 pre-K is higher than 45, but we are requesting 45 because of the blended model EC students and that sort of thing that will go in there as well. This cost would be reduced depending on, from the presentation you saw just a moment ago, if Durham pre-K receives additional funds for X number of seats, whatever portion of the 45 that we have requested comes off of that 716. And then the remainder would be funded if we remain at the place of 3 pre-K classrooms at Murray-Massenburg. And I think that all of that just depends on where the total amount of funding comes through. And then there's also a request for $1.5 million to add to our maintenance operations capital needs for building repairs and renovations. The ESSER funds that have been accessed for the last couple of years obviously sunset this fall. And Durham has a lot of older buildings with a lot of needs that need to be addressed. It is great to have funds available to support building and renovation of new schools, but there are a lot of existing schools that have a lot of needs that continue to get more severe. A lot of our buildings have outlived their lifespan, so to speak. And so that is actually one of the first places that you see the need is actually more around $4 to $5 million, but it is something that we felt we couldn't ask for all at once and will hopefully become part of a multi-year plan so that the county will repeatedly see additions to maintenance operations and capital dollars for operating needs in the districts over the next few years. Because the amount is actually greater than that is needed, but we're trying to do a balance in terms of what you're asking for. And what you can see in the presentation really is that this particular budget is pretty compensation focused. And that is not to say that there aren't other needs that the district has that we're going to spend a few minutes on the next slide, please. This is another, I call it the blue chart. This is the blue chart, shows the same dollar amounts, but in a different format. So you see there operating versus some pre-K grant funds that are split out separately, and then capital funds that are also split out separately, but it comes up to the same amount. Next slide, please. Some deferred needs, and these are sort of the ones that are at the top of the list. These is not all of them. A technology refresh. There are not dollars in the operating budget for that. Very few districts have dollars in an operating budget for that. It's about $8 million to refresh the current penetration, saturation of devices that we have in the district. We are 1-to-1. We are exploring some changes in whether or not we need to remain 1-to-1 as we move forward, particularly in the lower grade levels. But if we were to remain 1-to-1, it is an $8 million price tag for a technology refresh. That is also something that likely we need to look at how we build out in sort of a multi-year cycle so that it ends up being something like $2 million per year to refresh at whatever level we determine is the proper level moving forward. We have an ongoing need for curriculum resources and subscriptions that support our academic programming at around $2 million a year. This is beyond the dollars that are provided by the state, which is very limited in terms of dollars that are provided for instructional resources. We have a need for additional staff in some critical areas. And I think this, I would be stunned to not see this on the presentation of every single district in the state of North Carolina and many other places. I think in times, and the times that we are right now, there is a hyper focus on compensation and protecting schools and classrooms. And when you are looking at compensation and protecting schools and classroom, growing by additional staff just doesn't happen. And so you have more people serving more schools or greater needs, and you have some departments that are in need of a lot of help. And that's schools and central services. We anticipate this being about $4 million, and this is about additional counselors, additional social workers. This would be direct support to students and schools. Restorative practices coordinators in the elementary school level. The district is funding those coordinators at the secondary level, but not the elementary level. And in the next slide, I'll talk to you a little bit about the stress around that. Some elementary schools have found ways to have a restorative practice coordinator at the elementary level, but the ability to do that came through ESSER funds and other options that will no longer be available, and it wasn't in every elementary school. I mentioned central services staff. Our finance department and our HR department are overly lean, and based on just the complicated structure of all of the funding streams that come into the district, the number of staff that we have that we are paying out, and the different salary schedules that we're working through, it is clear that there are additional staff needed there. And then with HR, their landscape and work has changed a lot due to the fact that we are unable to hire staff and have high vacancy rates, and how they work both outside this building and in the community to support schools. There are additional staff needed, and those are two departments for sure that need additional staff. Our operational needs really are the largest piece, and this is just a beginning. $25 to $30 million for HVAC and life cycle repairs and replacements at our schools. I mentioned earlier, it is at least 10 million of this or more for needs that we have right now that need to be taken care of. We have some safety and security needs related to fire safety in our schools that need to be addressed. That is approximately another $10 million. I believe that has actually been previously discussed in some other forums. And then there are some equipment and repair needed to our cafeteria to fully support CEP implementation as we go into that. You may recall that the board did recently approve district-wide CEP for Durham Public Schools students, so that every student will have access to breakfast and lunch free of charge in every Durham Public School. It has been a goal of the community and these boards for a while now and will be implemented next year. And at a minimum, generally a district-wide CEP sees an increase of around 30% in student participation. And we have some cafeteria equipment and repair needs that are desperately needed in order to support being ready for that increase. So we're looking at needs there as well. And I think I've got a list received just recently about what that looks like by school. So that's just a sum of the deferred needs that we know are sort of top of mind as we move forward. Next slide, please. There has been some need to take a look at some of our fiscal practices and allocations and make some reductions and changes in how we operate. I think first, we have eliminated the flexibility of school-based staff that is beyond formula for 24-25. We have had a process in the past where schools were able to request and receive allotments that were beyond what a formula proposed in order to support needs in schools. That is a practice that we can no longer continue. That will impact the number of classroom teachers in schools. That will go down. It will impact the number of assistant principals in schools. That will go down because these allotments, some of these allotments that have been provided to schools are based on requests that go beyond formula that hit the local dollar directly. We have also eliminated flexibility of conversions from allotment categories. This would be that a school receives their resources, personnel resources in buckets, and then they choose to use them in a different manner. Sometimes those choices have to go on the local dollar because they can't be supported by state allotments. We have to maximize the state allotment. So we are having to eliminate some of that flexibility at conversions. These first two bullets are causing some transition pain in our schools right now. We need to tighten our hiring and payroll for teachers that have things like emergency licenses, permit to teach, are coming through EPP, which is educator preparation programs. These are people who are basically coming into the profession through an alternative licensure program. They are not certified teachers. They're going through a program with a 1-year permit or a 2-year license or something where they then have to take steps in order to actually achieve a teaching license. What's happening here is that when we pay teachers, like on the beginning teacher salary scale, and they're going through an emergency license program, at some point, if all the boxes aren't checked with DPI and the state, they become a salary exception, which means that we have to pay their full salary off local dollars and cannot use state positions. So we have to tighten our practices here. This will mean that some teachers who are hired as teachers on emergency license, permit to teach, that sort of thing, will start maybe with a teacher salary, but could end up at something like subpay instead, because we cannot continue to pay if we don't access the state level positions. So these are just some practices and things that have been in place that have happened due to the fact that we have to hire more EPP, more emergency license, more permit to teach because of the inability to recruit and the pipeline that just doesn't have folks coming through it. We've eliminated out-of-state travel. We've reduced in-state travel to mission critical, and that is current. That's been in place since late February, and we'll continue into 24 and 25. We have frozen local expenditures for the remainder of this school year, and we'll take a look at that for the beginning of the next school year as well. So no local dollar is able to be spent without coming to the cabinet for review. We've also implemented a review process for non-school-based hiring. It's not, I wouldn't call it a freeze at central services, but we are being judicious about whether or not we move forward with hiring any vacant positions at central services. Then if we were to continue down the path of, tightening our belt, the next step here would be looking at whether or not school-based vacancies need to be frozen. We're not there yet, but we have talked about it. We are also looking at implementing a reduction to local non-personnel budgets for 24-25. We're playing around right now with what sort of a percentage or amount that would need to be for the coming school year. We've frozen local expenditures for this year, but do we need to implement an across-the-board type of reduction for next year? I think it's important to note that all of these things are to handle current revenues and expenditures. None of these changes diminish the need for the activities that are reflected in the $27 million ask. And then I want to say just a couple of other things here. There are a lot of areas, and as an interim superintendent, what I'm really working to do is just sort of peel the onion back, take a look at what our current revenues, expenditures are, local dollars, state dollars, federal dollars, making sure that there is transparency, accountability, and understanding of where all of that is coming from. But I think it's also important as we move forward, because the needs are considerable, that in each division or department where applicable, we start thinking about our needs through a multi-year plan through opportunities to chip away at what's needed. An example that you've seen already is the $1.5 million request around maintenance and operations that really needs to be about $5 million. But there are other areas where that need is in place as well, whether it is expansion of classroom teachers or counselors or the restorative practices coordinators, how we support intervention needs in schools and reconfigure our existing dollars or ask for new dollars to provide support for those areas. But because those will all be people, our dollars are about 80% people and benefits. It is impossible to make reductions without impacting people. And so we try to impact people last, but that does mean that other things happen, like no growth of positions in central services, no travel, local non-personnel budgets. I mean, we're at a point right now where our schools are having to ask permission to spend their own money on paper for the end of the school year because we've frozen local expenditures. So, and we certainly want everyone to have what they need, but we need to be really judicious about what's needed now versus what can wait till July 1. And that's the landscape that we are in. And I thought it was important to make note of this because I think that while the commissioners provide a sort of block funding to the district that then we apportion into the needs and the priorities that the board determines, I think it's helpful and collaborative and transparent to understand that we are making changes internally as well in order to handle our current revenues and expenditures as we see them. I think that I also want to, make one mention around enrollment projections and charter school enrollment in the district. I think it'd be great if the pass-through for charters didn't come through the public school unit and it just came directly from the commissioners so that we didn't have to have this conversation all the time about what's happening with enrollment. I think all PSUs have a priority of making sure that all of their schools are a best choice and first choice for families. And a lot of the work that DPS has done in that area is reflected in the Growing Together initiative that you've heard about over the last couple of years. But any student who lives in Durham County is afforded whatever that per pupil amount is that is in DPS. So it doesn't matter what the enrollment is in DPS versus in charters. That total amount is the same and passes through whether it would come directly from the commissioners or it comes through DPS. And I think it's just helpful to see it as a one bucket of money where a portion is budgeted for that responsibility that is legislated. And I'll go on to the next slide, please. I think I'm closing back with the money slide. Yep, back to this. So again, just of note, this is what the board has approved moving forward for their board's proposed request. It remains largely the same as the superintendent's proposed budget that came out a couple of weeks ago with the one additional item of the additional supplement for difficult to staff positions at $1.39 million. And then I will just feel compelled to say again, these are all needs beyond what our current existing budget supports. Some of them are necessary to remain competitive for recruitment, to honor also work that was done through this community in collaboration with the commissioners and the community and this school board last year around the classified compensation study that has not been achieved and continues to be work that is done. I would be remiss also if I didn't mention that having watched the county manager's presentation 3 times now and looked through the materials a couple of times already, I'm aware that the proposed amount to be provided to the DPS is not $27.735 million. And I am thankful for the consideration and the work that has been done already to take a look at what our needs are. And then hopeful that we can continue to dialogue and work with our commissioners to present the case for what our needs are and see if there's opportunity to continue to partner on reaching the amounts that are needed for the priorities of the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Moore. I am going to try and keep us on track with time a bit. We have, according to this, 4 minutes for questions and comments, but I think we might need a little bit more than that. But we'll try to be mindful of our time. I'd like to open for comments and questions. Ms. Jacobs.
But beforehand, really quick, for my colleagues, I know you saw on the agenda, it said forthcoming, and forthcoming means it's coming and it never came. But both myself as well as the clerk have sent everybody the presentation. We sent it as a PDF also. Since the link didn't work, but go ahead. Thank you.
It is also available on Board Docs, and it has been on Board Docs. Okay, I'm not sure why that happened. Ms. Jacobs.
Thank you so much, Superintendent Moore. I just want to follow up on a few things. One is related to funding for Murray Massenburg. I think that that's going to be an important opportunity for us to address some of the issues that we just heard from Linda Chappelle. And in the county manager's budget, she recommends that we do directly fund the needs at Murray Massenburg, and also that we are directly funding, I think it was $66 million worth of things that we have pulled out over the years from being funneled through the Durham Public Schools budget, 62 million that we now directly fund. But I think it's really important that we address the recommendations that we just heard from Linda Chappelle. And I would just say that as we, whether they can be done before the budget is finalized, or at least commit to getting done over the next year, really important, because if you listen to the county manager, well, you'll hear in the next budget, we are looking at a future where we are going to have very constrained finances, and we have to go after every single piece of money. And when we don't have also credentialed pre-K sites, we're not pulling, which I think about 10 Durham Public Schools pre-K sites are not credentialed. That means we're not pulling down the Durham pre-K dollars. We're not pulling down the Head Start dollars. So collectively, collaboratively, we have got to be going after every source of funding that there is. So I just wanted to mention that. And also related to grants around things like RAP care. We've missed an opportunity for that in this year, and we need to work together. So I really appreciate what the manager said last night about us working together collaboratively, not just when we come around to the budget, but on a monthly basis. I have a few questions related to.
I have a clarifying question. If
Oh,
I
okay.
could, please. And I just have to pull on my experience, which is a little bit different in terms of how we talk about things here. When you talked about the manager's presentation focusing on funding that's necessary for pre-K at Murray Massenburg, that is through Durham pre-K?
The Durham pre-K.
Through
would be-
Durham pre-K
Yes,
funds.
and
Okay.
Durham pre-K
Okay.
would operate.
Yeah,
through.
and I would just say that we don't, Durham pre-K has not yet provided, I think, allotments on based on what requests have been. So we would need to sort of take a look at that to determine what is coming from Durham pre-K that offsets what the request is, and then determine the ability and will of the board in what that remaining amount is. Because ultimately that will be their call. That's that will need to be made actually probably before the legislative budget is finalized, simply because school starts in August and the budget's not always done by then. And then I think just an additional point is that, pre-K is another one of those areas where I've told them they need a multi-year, 5-year plan that shows what the cost is for increasing slots, increasing sites, because it does require facility renovations. It does impact capacity in schools. And we have to take a look at where those sites are, because in some cases we have pre-K sites that are at 100%. And in some cases we have pre-K sites that are much lower than 100%, 70%, somewhere in those areas. And that really has to do with parents who are choosing not to accept slots that they are being offered. Sometimes it has to do with transportation, sometimes it has to do with location, sometimes it has to do with the RAP care that was mentioned. There are a number of things. So I think all of that needs to be woven into a multi-year plan in terms of how you address it moving forward. So I just wanted to address that.
Absolutely. And that's what Linda said about we need a plan together. Yeah.
Really quick, while we're on that point, because this was the only question I had,
Yes.
and since
Yeah, go ahead.
so just for clarification, and thank you for that clarifying question, Superintendent Moore. I know that your slide shows $716,000. Our allotment was 950, and I know that we have to wait on the General Assembly, but that's a gap of about $234,000. So, I mean, do we really have to wait since there's that big of a cushion there, or can we not take that entire calculus? And so.
Yeah, that I'm going to need to turn out to Ms. Chappelle. That's not really our call,
Yeah,
because she's
that's
funding
fair.
more than just DPS with Durham pre-K.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, so
That's fair, thank
in
you.
our meetings with the district, earlier this year, we agreed that our goal would be to fund 45 seats at Murray-Massenburg. When we prepared our budget request to the county manager for Durham Pre-K, we incorporated those seats in our request. We haven't offered any seats to any sites because we don't have a budget yet, but, we would balance that. There is that gap, but that gap does address other sites and other programs.
I would, and so just related to what you just presented us, it would be really helpful if you could provide us with information directly about the compensation study. And also, I would like to know how last year's budget, we designated $4.1 million for classified staff, how that was implemented. And then I have a question about whether you all have looked at a 2-year implementation of the compensation study, what would that look like? That's something that we have done within the county when we've implemented compensation studies. We've done it over a 2-year period, prioritizing the lowest paid workers first. So I would be helpful to know what that would look like. I also have a follow-up question about what role has the changing enrollment in Durham Public Schools played with the Growing Together study? And was there any look at operationally on, because we've kept the same number of schools open, added new schools with the enrollments declining, and just role does that play? Is that something that you all have looked at with the budget? I mean, it's not something you have to answer now, but I know I just would be interested in that assessment. And just to let you all, and whether you have looked at any of the bond money related to some of the most critical needs for some of the repairs. And I know that in the county manager's budget, we are providing $6 million in the yearly repairs, but whether the bond could be a source of some of the more urgent needs now.
I can answer a few of those, but not all of those very quickly. I think the simple answer for the 4.1 million that the commissioners provided towards the classified compensation salary is that where it stands now, it provided, based on the board vote in March, we switched to the 22-23 salary schedules plus 11%. So everyone received an 11% raise from their prior year's salary is how the 4.1 was implemented. About 4% of that came from the state legislated raise, and the additional 7% came from the 4.1 million and other dollars. So everyone received an 11% raise in classified study based on 22-23, 4% from the state, 7% from the additional dollars provided by the commissioners in the local budget. I think also that it's important to note that the $6 million that's provided currently to operations is not just for HVAC and life cycle repairs, but all of their operating expenses as well. There's a lot of things that are built into that. It's at a point really where all you can really do is emergencies. And that's tough. So there needs to be space for intentional responsiveness to things that we know are outdated or ending their life cycle prior to it becoming an emergency, which is where that is coming from. And I do think for Growing Together, there is a presentation that's sort of a 10-year look at enrollment and needs that hopefully we can put. I think the next joint meeting is scheduled for August 6th. It is ready. It has been collaboratively developed with our staff and county staff. So it should be ready if we are ready to have it on that agenda. And that'll help with some of that, I think, and provide more information around that.
And last, I just want to say, I appreciate you sharing with us some of the fiscal constraints that have been implemented. And, that's just unfortunately the times we're in. The county manager presented last night that we have frozen positions for next year, which will save us $2 million. And also all the departments have been asked to make cuts, so, which brings in another 1 million. So I appreciate that you all are looking at that as well. Thank you.
Vice Chair Burns.
One quick question, and I echo those sentiments, and I appreciate the fact that you did take the time to look at our meeting multiple times. I hope other folks, I look at I look at your meetings multiple times. Also, I actually tune in if I can, and sometimes it's in the middle of the day, so I have to get home. But a quick question, it's a clarifying question. Well, a clarity for me, and maybe for some others. I'm gonna try to do a comparison of ESSER funding and ARPA funding, and that's probably really wrong. So that is where you might have to jump in. So for ARPA funding, we know it sunsets December 31st, 2024. It has to be, allocated, but we can use it up until 2026. I know that ESSER has multiple tranches. I'll never forget that chart that you all showed us at another meeting where this money can be used for this. It was actually directed to something really particular. My question is, do ESSER funds actually sunset on December 31st, 2024, and there's no room for those to be reallocated elsewhere? And that comes from the fact just last week, our chief deputy county manager was able to bring us Biden's 10th final rule. And in the event, I'm gonna use a bad example. So let's just say it's a construction piece and that construction company says, we just cannot do this, but it is after December 2024. We are in a position to then put that back out again on the street since it was already allocated post December 31st, 2024, and go find a new vendor. I'm wondering, with your ESSER funds, do you all have that type of flexibility post December 31st, 2024 to 26? And I'm only asking big because, that might feed into how we can also continue to creatively use dollars. So I'll stop there.
The quick answer is we do not. Our funds have to be, let's say we have 10, on June 30th, when we reconcile our books beginning July, we think we have $10 million left. That $10 million has to be approved in a plan and encumbered, meaning the contract's issued and committed by September 30th at the latest, and we must have a zero balance by the end of December. Otherwise, the funds revert.
Thank you so much for that clarification.
Ms. Byer.
Thank you all so much. I apologize that you all didn't have the information ahead of time, and I'm glad that you have it now. I know that Superintendent Moore is ready to answer questions in writing. I think it's important for you all to hear from this board that we were thoughtful and deliberate about bringing you essential needs for this year. And I appreciate the strong start that the manager has recommended to you all. But I hope you will continue to consider as you look at our needs that our funding is for our folks. Our compensation has to improve as we work to keep up with county and city wages, Duke wages, wages in Chapel Hill, Orange, and Wake County. And Chair Umstead is on the Public School Forum Board, and if she didn't get a chance to send it to you, I encourage you all to look at the local school finance study. While Durham is strong, Durham ranks 8th in ability to pay. But we rank 42nd in relative fund effort. That to us says y'all are doing a lot, but we can stretch more in Durham to take care of our K-12 students. And I'm so appreciative of you all continuing to look at your budget and find ways that we can better support our staff and our students. Our minimum wage right now for some of our employees still sits at $17 an hour. We are working really hard. Y'all are above 19. I don't know where, last time we talked, you were at 1980 something. 1922 this year, and then I assume you've got raises built in. And again, we celebrate those raises for your employees. We are just trying to take care of our folks that are struggling to live, work, and thrive in Durham. So thank you for any consideration you all can have in the coming weeks.
Commissioner Jacobs.
I just want to respond to is the reference to some of the data that's in the not public school forum data. It's really important that there's a lot of data that we could point to that we would say is taken out of context. And that in particular, for instance, does not reflect what I just mentioned, the $62 million that we directly fund. We have, if we added in all the things, all of the funding the county does provide, that number would be different. And so I think it's very important that we, you know, don't look at, I mean, I have issues with some of that data because it doesn't reflect the full support that the county provides. And so, we just looked at data last night that we are now, with what's proposed in the county manager's budget, we would be the third highest in the state for per pupil funding, but we would rank 22nd in terms of the per capita revenue that we have. And just as Durham Public Schools population is very challenged, why we have so many needs, we also have those needs in our community. And that's why our county budget, we have to provide the same support that we need for people in our community in public health, social services, other areas. It's the same that we have in our community. So I think it's important that we look at the complexity of things like that.
Commissioner Carter?
Yes, thank you so much for this presentation and the manager's presentation, the county manager's presentation last night. Both of these are really excellent and really clear and really helpful. And I just want to start by saying I appreciate the fairly bold request coming from the Board of Education. I think it's very important that our community and that the commissioners know specifically what are the actual needs, what are the most essential needs and what will they cost. And then it's up to us to say, what can we afford? And that's what we'll be grappling with. And I think we want to afford as much as we can for our schools. I think we all believe that the way we educate our children today is the most important for what is going to be the tomorrow of our community. And I'm really, while I have a chance, just want to say how proud I know we all are of our Durham pre-K program and all that Linda described about it today and all the ways that we're focusing on the highest quality and et cetera, et cetera. It was great. I do hope that we will take every point that she gave us and develop a plan, like Interim Superintendent Moore said, for how to achieve some of those goals. Let's just go to the compensation study again. It sounds like your lowest paid staff right now is in the $17 per hour range, which I think may be what our goal was for you all for the last, time we increased funding for the classified staff, with the understanding that we'd be on a trajectory to get you all to the same level as what Durham County's lowest paid staff are. And I hope that is still our goal. I personally have as a priority wages for county staff, wages for Durham Public School staff. So I hope we can figure out a way to make that happen soon, whether it takes a couple of years. I hope not. I mean, we were fighting for 15 back in 2015. And now, over time, we have to be fighting for 19. It'll be more sooner than later. And we can't keep asking people to wait. So these are our lowest paid employees and some doing some of the most important work. I know everybody believes that, and we've got to figure out how to make that happen for our people in our community. And I know the county tends to think about how enrollment is declining, and it's where it was in 2004, which is what it was when I started as a school board member in 2004. And guess what? The schools were overcrowded then. And we had land for elementary school A and F, and some of those are being built now. And that's because we needed it then in 2004. So, the enrollment numbers, I also thought Superintendent Moore made a really important point that we're still paying for the children who aren't coming to DPS. They're just going to charter schools and we're paying for them that way. And then we're taking the same per pupil allotment for the ones we still have. And so, I don't know, that point resonated with me. I'm super, super worried about the emergency capital needs that you all described. We didn't have a bond from 2007 until 2016. So it's no surprise that deferred maintenance has built up to the point where it's emergency. And, maybe we're going to have to analyze ways to meet those needs. And it has risen to this level of an emergency because we probably weren't on as regular a bond schedule as we should have been. And now we are, and we're already talking about the next one in 2026 though, right? So it's a couple of years away. Anyway, just I don't have any other questions, but just in summary, I appreciate the full ask, and I want you to know that this board wants to give as much as we can, and we're going to work hard to do that. And it is based on what we can afford and not on whether or not we think DPS is doing an amazing job, because we think you are doing the best you can with what you have. Thank you.
Lewis?
Thank you for those comments, Commissioner Carter. That's exactly where I was beginning. You all do know our needs, and I think it's super important that you were able to hear where where our deferred needs are, as you hear every year, but also where we have cut needs as well. It's a lot of work, and it's not, again, for lack of desire, but I do want to appeal to a couple of points. I started this work in 2016 when my oldest was in first grade. He graduates in 2026, 2 short years from now, and I've been very emotional about that. What does that look like? And as Dr. Chappelle gave her presentation today about our pre-K, and we didn't have a chance to ask the questions, those are the ones we're talking about for 2037. And as we get older, we know that time waits for no one and it goes quickly. And I want to make sure that we are really giving enough time to develop a plan, as was being talked about. It feels like potatoes to me, because our funding comes from the county and we want to put a pre-K in every school. So if we're at 25 to get to 32, that's just 7 more schools. What does that longitudinal plan look like? And I just want to make sure we put some emphasis around that. And we're thinking about the transportation needs. And with RAP Care, I would want some more information around how much is available from local funding so far, how many we're supporting with RAP Care, and how much more is needed to go into that plan. And then that goes back to the data. I've been asking for this data for the past 4 years. Where are we at with kindergarten readiness, and how are our children performing from coming from pre-K into kindergarten, to know that this has been a successful program, or what metrics is needed to make the changes that's needed to be made to best support our youngest learners, that they're prepared for the workforce in 2037. I don't know what the contention is or why it's so hard to collaborate on that, but it just feels like it's been this big mystery. And I just hope we can come around that, because that is where our, that's the investment that we make now for 2037. And the last thing I'll say about pre-K is workforce development, to hear that we have a robust workforce development for a pipeline for our teachers. Is there, as we try to maximize where funding comes from, is it possible to look to the city for some workforce development funding as well? When I think about, and I stepped back to get some coffee and I didn't hear all of what Commissioner Jacobs was saying about certified pre-K classrooms. So I'm only assuming that there are some that are not certified and that we're missing out on funding, was how I filled in the gaps. It comes back to capacity. We can get those certified when we have the capacity with the teaching staff and the operations to get those things. Again, it goes hand in hand with the funding that's needed for our staff to be able to give more attention to those areas that's needed. So again, the argument is not about what we need. You know what we need. You know what we're deferring. You understand that we were in this financial crisis, and pushed us to, again, seek funding from federal for our universal CEP programs. So whereas we may get $2 million from federal funding having a universal CEP program, it also comes at a cost of 25 to 30 million for a part of that to upgrade the equipment that's going to be needed to support that need, along with our own logistics that our staff has to deal with, getting everybody fed in the right amount of time. Some kids are eating as early as 9 to 10 o'clock. Some kids don't have enough time to finish their lunches. All of those come with the things that are moving forward. So going to this federal programming will impact our current budget needs as well that we are deferring, but we'll be coming back for, again, potatoes to meet that need from our local budget. And the last thing I'll say, dealing with the classified study, ideally, we do, as you were suggesting, Ms. Jacobs, Commissioner Jacobs, if we were to have the compensation, over a couple of years, technically, this is the second year of rolling that out. We know how we got here, and this is where we are in that second year. So we're actually asking staff to wait for 3 years. So I just want to appeal to that concern that I have. My prioritization is fully funding our classified staff who have been disenfranchised for far too long by the state. They've experienced the greatest harm. And I've heard the commitment from our commissioners to fund our classified staff to increase that funding. So I would like to make sure that you all are considering what that would look like and know that this is the second year of the implementation, although we had to do a reset. There have only been 3 annual pay raises from the state, from 2%, 2.5% to 4% over the past few years. And we do depend on local to do different in Durham and supporting our staff. Also, having highly experienced staff, certifying, helping support the master's pay. How do we keep qualified staff in our district as well? So if you're looking, again, if there's places to add and the things that we want to do, it does start with our compensation. And I just hope that you will consider where we are with this compensation study for classified staff. And then our teacher supplement is another 4 million. So thank you.
Comments, questions? We will conclude this item. Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you, Superintendent Moore. And now we will move to our next item, budget implications with the county staff. So I'll pass it to Dr. Sowell.
Good morning, everyone. And I'm going to ask Deputy County Manager Claudia Hager to come up. She's going to provide a summary of the recommended budget presentation that I made to commissioners last evening, including the financial constraints that we're working within. But I will say that the recommended budget was developed even with the financial constraints. It was developed with education as the primary focus. And so as you've heard this morning, our board is committed, and the individual conversations I have with them and the regular meetings that are had, I hope you hear the commitment from our board. And so it is my hope that, we now have an opportunity to forge a new path. In the past, you've brought the recommendation to us, we've had final budget adoption, and then everyone goes their separate ways until the next budget cycle. And what I'm hopeful is that, regardless of where our final adoption is in our board, the budget that the board approves for DPS, that we have sustained and continued conversations. I really want this to be a stronger partnership between the county and Durham Public Schools, our staff, so that, as Commissioner Carter said, we can analyze the needs together and develop strategies to make sure we meet the needs of Durham Public Schools, because it is certainly a priority for our board. And so with that, I will turn it over to Deputy County Manager Claudia Hager.
Good morning, everyone. I feel like I've just heard the budget presentation. As I listened to the remarks, I told Dr. Sowell I will not be as eloquent as she was last night, but we'll give you highlights and may go quickly through the slides and some of them, because much of what I will share are remarks that we talked about in the March meeting. We sort of set up what our outlook looked like. But again, we'll move through, and you can go to the next slide. We'll talk about the framework, some expenditure and revenue highlights, the school's allocation, as well as time for you to discuss. And we'll try to go through again quickly, we did also provide a copy of the manager's recommended budget slides because there are additional slides that we will not cover due to time. Next slide, please. I was excited to hear about 5-year trending and forecast beyond one period. And we've all sort of collectively done that in different ways over the years. And some of it's required because it's state. Some of it for us, like our rating agencies, they want to see what your 5-year outlook and they want to see what you're looking like as it relates to state and federal dollars and those impacts. They all impact what you do. And we all have competing needs and partners of various sides of the organization. And so for us, in looking at that, slower sales tax growth was the biggest and most glaring thing that we're dealing with. And it's a good thing that we are still in a positive space. Some communities in our state, they're in a negative place right now with their sales tax when compared to pre-pandemic levels. So although it's slowing, it's growing at a pace that's similar to what it was prior to the pandemic. We'll not go into all of these others, but we have some pressures, how we use our fund balance reserves, occupancy taxes, the funding expenditure growth that we know is needed because of deferred maintenance issues with DPS, as well as pressures that come because the state dollars are declining. And that's a pressure. Universal pre-K is another area we know for the next 5 years and beyond will be a priority as we try to continue to work towards higher educational outcomes. And that starts from 0 to 5. And so our board has been committed and our taxpayers have supported it as well. As with the schools, employee benefits, although the state pays for that primary, we do also have to cover those expenses as well. And the capital improvement plan. So we have to couple those together, both the operating and capital expenses when we talk about the budget, because we know down the line there will be a debt service payment. And now the cost of borrowing money is higher than it was 3 years ago. We just financed some limited obligation bonds. We had a great rate of 3.75%. 2 years ago, we got it for 1.3%. So the cost of borrowing is higher. We have to keep that in our modeling. Again, we talked about compensation, the infrastructure dollars no longer being there. Those dollars were transformative. And we are so grateful for them, but how are those gaps closed? So again, these are some of the patterns that we're looking at. They're real, and we'll try to work collectively through some of them that cross the aisle for DPS in the county, and then there are other partners that we will do. Next slide, please. We started out this budget before we even got one request with $34 million expenditure budget and a projected revenues of about 18 million at that time. So we started out in the hole, if it's the best way to say it. That was before we got a county budget request, before we received DPS's budget. But based on our modeling in the fall, we saw we were headed for a cliff. And in November, we told the board that in departments, we need to pause and freeze. Even though our population is growing, we have increased demands, we're going to have to slow down how we're managing this budget. We also recognize the expansion request from the city, from the educational side would also be tremendous. Again, talked about the state declines in the support, as well as loss of dollars from ESRI and other types of funds. We also knew going into that there was an increased need for capital and debt support. All of those together, before we even got started, was how we sort of set the framework for the board, for the budget. Next slide, please. The manager's recommended budget was developed with priorities set across many areas. I talked about that original gap before we got started, but there were over $50 million worth of requests above available revenues. With that, we still are excited that the manager was able to recommend funds for many priority areas, including the dollars for education-focused priorities within DPS, support for county employees, and to maintain our county's fiscal accountability. Some of this was also achieved with reallocating existing positions so that we didn't put more pressure on the property tax base with growth. And as I shared before, there was a pause in departmental budget growth so that we could contain those expenses. Next slide, please. When looking at the revenues, the key is for us going into a budget is what's that natural growth? We are so fortunate that our natural growth for both the general fund and the capital financing fund for property taxes yielded $22.2 million. That was fantastic. In some of our other areas, we just did not see that same type of growth. And it's all economies have ebbs and flows. And so some of these we're seeing some slowdown. So in some of the areas when looking at Register of Deeds revenues, those actually were a decline. We also reduced the amount that we allocated in fund balance reserves based on our portfolio. We appropriated larger levels in prior years, and so it's at a point that we need to shore it up. And so that was allocated at a lower level as well. We'll talk a little bit more about some of these in a few slides, but our picture and outlook is much different than what we'd seen in the past. Next slide, please. We're looking at expenditures. We went over some of these in earlier discussions. There were dollars allocated for Durham Public Schools at $13 million, for our pre-K increased investment of $950,000, and dollars for the employee compensation increases with the county at $13.3 million, which included a cost of living adjustment and the incremental amount from prior year changes. There was a allocation of $1.7 million for FTEs in the current year to support Medicaid expansion, and that expense also had an offsetting revenue of $700,000. It's an area that the manager shared about were strategies that we've put in place for this coming year to freeze non-crucial personnel positions. There were allocations also made for our eviction diversion program, as well as our dollars needed for industrial extension policies for those program areas. And another area that we did have an adjustment to was for the operating expenses reductions. This does not show all of the dollars that were realigned, but this is a net number that departmental budgets were reduced. Next slide, please. I talked about this earlier. We have a $2.96 billion tax base, and we are so fortunate to have a great collection rate. Our tax administrators here, we're grateful. He also embraces his role and does a phenomenal job with his team. The natural growth of the property tax rate is at $22.2 million. Again, we are so fortunate to be in a community that individuals desire to live. And in some other places, they're not realizing those types of natural growth. So that natural growth means that we don't have to raise taxes for that. And so we're quite fortunate to be in this region for that reason. Next slide, please. With the expenses that we talked about that were prioritized, and again, as I shared, we had over 50 million of expenses above our available projected revenues. There was a gap, and the only options we have to close gaps include property tax increases as well as budget cuts. The tax rate is recommended by the manager for an increase of 3.25 cents. This will generate $17.3 million. And the table at the bottom will show the patterns and trends as it relates to our tax rate increases. Next slide, please. For sales taxes, and I'll stay on this slide for just a minute and get to one that's more impactful. We have about $131 million in sales tax revenue, which means those are dollars that we don't have to put pressure on the property taxes. That's an equivalent to 25 cents of property tax dollars if we did the math. In recent months, the sales tax levels have declined. And if you go to the next slide, that'll be helpful. This slide will show the changes over the years in sales tax revenue. We'll not go through all of them, but you will note the changes that occurred in the last 3 years. On average, the first 2 years after the pandemic, where we did the initial pandemic acknowledgement, we had we had sales tax rates that were collected close to the $11 million range. Last year, it was at $21 million. And we're projecting this year a $3.3 million increase. And so when we're projecting these numbers, we do our best effort. And when we saw the patterns back in the fall, we immediately said we have to stop because the dollars aren't coming in at the same level. And so we shifted accordingly. The good thing is that we're still growing, and some communities, again, are not having that success. And so we're at a level higher than our base pre-pandemic. We're hoping that the levels go back up, so please go by. But this is in fact our reality. Next slide, please. Other major revenue sources, our investment income revenue is up. And so we did increase the dollars for that. Our EMS patient revenues are also increased. In the Register of Deeds, as well as fund balance appropriations, those have declined. And I shared briefly about that earlier. I'm trying to go fast, but hopefully not too fast. Next slide, please. And we've covered some of this, but when looking at all of the other revenue sources, when compared to prior years, and you will just see the drastic gap that we started with. And it just tells the story as to why we had huge limitations on what we could support. In 23-24, we were able to budget close to $17.4 million in other revenues minus property tax dollars. That number is almost less than $1 million for this year. So that put more pressure on the property tax dollars. Those are our realities. We're resilient and we will plan accordingly, but it has made for a tough period balancing a budget. Next slide, please. This overall slide shows the increases for the general fund budget. Overall is at 6.8%. And the county budget at 7.3%. And it's important to note, we're paying, for instance, more for debt service this year. So that's why the overall budget is growing in some areas, and some are supported with enterprise type fund related expenses as well. Next slide, please. This is the slide that reflects dollars that were allocated to Durham Public Schools. There's an overall 6.9% increase in funds made available, which is an increase of about $380 per pupil funding. And the total amount per student is $5,030. That's on the far right side of that table. You will also see other areas funded it's to support Durham Public Schools, the largest amount being the debt service payment, and then dollars for other areas that directly or indirectly supports Durham Public Schools. Next slide, please. This chart, when I have these slides like this, I call this the eye chart. It's such an eye chart, I can't even see it from here. And so I'm finding my chart here, my tab, but it shows, you know, I'm a data person, so you can't find too many different ways that I want to get excited when I see that, you know, the public forums report, I got excited about that. The North Carolina Association of County Commissioners, they have reports, and we do our own analysis as well. This is a version of current expense allocation per ADM. Durham has ranked, I know there was a question before, sort of how do we compare to other communities with funding per student. We have always remained in the top 5 funded counties in the state, and that is something the board and the schools can be proud of. But with any number, especially when you have gaps, that's not enough. And so we do recognize it. But we do show this chart to show how we compare to peers, as well as the assessed valuation per capita and the rank for that. And with that, our assessed valuation per capita, we're ranked at 22. And when looking at the largest 10 counties per pupil, we're the 9th out of those with per capita. Next slide, please. We're looking at historical allocations. Over the past 4 years, Durham has received an increase with this recommendation of nearly $50 million at $47.8 million over a 4-year period. Next slide. And some of this information, all of you talked about earlier, but the allocation for pre-K is at $8.8 million with which includes the increase of $965 million. So I keep saying 65 million, maybe I keep speaking it. That's the second time I've done that. You know, I started out my career in Smart Start, so I always have a soft spot for pre-K. So Donna, Chappelle, I keep giving them some more money, but $947,000. Okay, and so that, if you can go to the next slide. That covers sort of our outlook. The timeline is shown. We have work sessions happening in May. The public hearing is on the 28th of May. We have additional work sessions on the 3rd of June and the 4th of June. And the budget is adopted potentially on June the 10th. I will entertain any questions. And sorry for going so fast.
And if I can just add real quickly, and Superintendent Moore referred to the block funding, and we certainly understand that the funding that the board provides to DPS, you all can allocate it whichever way is appropriate, you deem appropriate. But I will say the 13 million that was recommended in my budget was recommended to hopefully cover the state salary increases, the teacher supplement, and it was the teacher supplement that was in the superintendent's recommended budget, not the additional amount that we heard about today. And then also the master's pay and the charter school surcharge, but certainly understanding that you all can allocate it as you deem appropriate.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Thank you, Ms. Hager. And questions, comments? Vice Chair Burns.
Okay, and I know, Brett, thank you so much for your patience. I know we have pushed you out a few times. I just want to echo some sentiments and maybe put a button on it for some, might push a button with others, but I know who on the school board I'm in community with. I also know who is out in the community on the school board. And so that's why I'm gonna start with Javanya because I know you can receive it because you're not sensitive. we're like you, sis. Like we're on year 2 as well. So when we made that investment, and it's not to beat a dead horse, but for some folks in this room, you all have not had any conversations with us since the incident that took place in December. That's just the honest to God truth. You haven't. And I know you've been busy. Some of us have been fear for whatever reason. You have a major financial snafu occurred and you didn't talk to none of the purse. You didn't talk to none of the reimburse. And we are here to be the nurse and the reimburse today. But no conversations have been had. And so for some, not for all, but for some, that is something sadly that Dr. Sowell, as well as Superintendent Moore, have had to inherit, unfortunately, and they have done a yeoman's job, a yeoman's job of trying to usher this in. I bring all that up because I'm just going to go back to October. Well, I'm going to go back to February. When the previous superintendent was here, we all said, hey, how much do you all need? We were just like y'all, just as shocked that the 4.1 million was insufficient. Even more shocked because many of the classified staff, unlike a lot of people sitting at this table, they're our neighbors. They go to church with us. So we had to, while we could not empathize totally, we had to sympathize with the fact that they felt like for the first time, much like our employees, they had been seen. And clearly one person, not Dr. Mubingo, one person made sure that that didn't happen. So in year 2, because that's what we were at, I'm gonna go back to our policy retreat. I was not by myself. I'm gonna use the word I because I actually said it, but I was not by myself. Everybody was in agreement. I stood up at the policy retreat in October. I said, y'all, we made it happen last year for the classified staff. We made it happen for y'all last year. We gave them 11%. I said, but both of my sisters left Durham Public Schools so they could get master's pay. And I said, one of the things that I'm gonna really be focused on this year is master's pay. That didn't mean that I didn't care about the classified staff because in my brain, we did that, right? We did that. And we asked everybody in this room, did we do it? We did that. And then we found out that we didn't. So it's not that we don't care. We have been on a track. We have been on a plan. And this monkey wrench, due to no fault to anybody in this room, I hope if it is somebody's fault, I hope you get fired very soon. But it's due to nobody's fault in this room. And so we came forth, even this weekend, when we were talking about it, when we did some tug of war about it, it was not always a 3-cent increase. I don't know what everybody else did. Actually, I do talk to the manager. We then still came back and said, all right, we want the master's pay in there. That's because in our minds, we taken care of everything else and we'd all made a promise that this was the next thing we were going to do. So I do want to go back. You all can do what you want to with the money, but I want you all to understand that in our minds, the judicious women that we are, we actually thought that we were on track to be supportive. And I do appreciate what you said, Superintendent Moore, about the 1.5 million, and also that you brought up about the bond, because we haven't been on track. And most of the kids that go to the school, I'm gonna keep saying it, look like me. I don't want them walking around in a place that's not safe. It's not even just aesthetically pleasing. I want them to learn in a place that is safe. And so the last thing I'm going, because we have another presentation, you all, this is the first time, and I thank Superintendent Moore, we've seen in your presentations in the past, like, oh, these are deferred needs. I think this is the first time, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, that I've seen a slide where you all have said, these are where we have made reductions. I can tell y'all, this is not the first time we've came to y'all and said this is the 3rd year that we've come to you all and said, so I want you all for those of you all who didn't do like Superintendent Moore and watch the presentation last year, or even take the time to do a juxtaposition between the presentations from the years before, we cut $2.5 million last year. We cut $1 million this year. We raised EMS fees this year. We raised taxes 3 times. The last year when we raised those taxes, we went out, we want to do a bond. Claudia, keep me honest here. We asked the public, can we raise taxes by 3 cents? They said yes. When we went to swap it, I think if I'm not mistaken, we were able to get those bonds for 1.5. Thank you. We were able to do it for 1.5. So we could have kept it there, but because we wanted to honor what we had said we were going to do for y'all, we came back, manager said, throw another 1.5 on there, because the public is already in a posture that they can accept 3%. So once again, we raised taxes. This year, I didn't think we were going to have to, but if y'all do the math, out of the 17 million, it's going to raise 13 of it is for this. So every single year, we shut our lives down. We tell every department, sit back, be quiet. don't say anything because we're going to do whatever we're getting pushed to do. And it's not that we wouldn't do it. Everybody in here loves kids, but you all take your public interest group and show up to our houses and do all kinds of crazy stunts and things as if we weren't going to do it in the first place. And so I just want folks to know, please go back and look at these numbers. We raised our property tax, make sure I'm right on this. Y'all saw that 21 to 3.3. We got 1/7 of what we would traditionally get. 1/7, and we still trying to make it work. We're still trying to make it work. And so if you all want to really make this work, stop pretending that you're talking to people that sit on this side of the room, because you're not. And I'm gonna be very open in the last 6 months that I got to let parents know who advocated for their child and who did not. That's all I got.
Superintendent Moore.
I'm wholly uncomfortable with the next comment that I'm going to make, and I'm going to make it anyway on behalf of the board in a role as an interim superintendent. I think it's important to respect roles and collaboration and the boundaries that exist as elected officials in this room, and I am not one of them. I think for a presentation and a commentary to specifically point out from the commissioners any expectations around what line items in a budget proposal are and are not funded is inappropriate. I think it puts the board in a corner. I think it divides us in the community in terms of this elected Board of Education that is supposed to establish those priorities outside of undue influence or individual advocacy. And I'll just leave it there.
I agree, and I think it's horrible when DAE does it as well. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Ms. Byer?
So I appreciate the detailed presentation that you all gave last night and the additional detail that Claudia shared this morning. One thing that I think would be helpful is if we share with you all the number of positions that we are having that will be less to serve the same number of students next year. And that is due to cuts in ESRA, but also really difficult financial decisions that Superintendent Moore is making that is really currently and in the future impacting our students. And so as we cut folks, I'd like you to know how many less people will be serving students next year in our school district. And if I might ask that you all, I saw that you all had a slide that said you had some minimally new additions and new positions. Just articulate that so our community can understand kind of what your goals are there. And I'm sure they are all shared values of this community. I just think it'd be good for us to be transparent in that as we go forward, and it would inform you all as well.
Can I also point out, and I'm not to belabor this point, you said, what are those positions? If you look at the piece of paper that's directly in front of you or the YouTube that was on last night, there are 50 new positions, 35 are for Medicaid and Medicare after the state decided to do Medicaid. We're only doing 10 new positions. We have outlined on each slide what those 10 are. There are only 10. And so it is right here in this document that is in front of everybody.
Yeah, and then I would just follow up with, I know our folks are going to be looking at it too, but the additional funding that looks like over 13 million for additional budget for your employees. And the number of employees that you all have is 2,000, 2,300?
2,400.
2,400. And then the number of employees, and I know that is the state's responsibility. Let's be clear, it is the state's responsibility, and we will continue to work with our Durham delegation to advocate on our employees' behalf as well. But our number of employees is over 5,000, 5,400, something like that. So just.
And then we carry, I think it's another 1,200 employees on DPS side that we fully fund, correct? Yes.
Are there other comments or questions for Ms. Heger or Dr. Sowell?
Yeah, I just want to get back to what the county manager said about us working together on a monthly basis going forward, and what Linda Chappelle talked about, and and board member Lewis followed up on about developing a plan we have to face the reality that we have related to state funding and what's going on with the state legislature with the financial forecast for the near future, that we have to look for other funding sources for the needs in our community. It's just not going to be sustainable to only look at county funding. And that's why I'm a big supporter of the Durham Next plan. I'm on the Tourism Authority because that is a plan that's going to help bring in more tourism, which generates occupancy tax and more sales tax revenue, taking, the pressure off of the property tax rate. These are the types of things that we have to look towards, the fact that we've got the Durham Public Schools Foundation, the chamber is forming, reinvigorating their foundation that's going to be focusing on things like education, housing, transportation, trying to get the private sector more involved. We've got to look at every single grant funding that we can look at, federal, state. And, I think it would be good to talk at another meeting just about what types of, again, resources you have for grant funding. We have our great John in the back. We hired somebody to help us oversee grant funding because our staff is trying to go after as much money as we can. So this is just more big picture about how we look at, for instance, the CEP. I mean, that program is so important. Can we get the private sector in helping to fund some of the capital needs in some of our cafeterias, our restaurants and partners like that? I think we're going to have to really be creative and us really working together, hand in glove on how we support our community and our children and our schools. Thank you.
Commissioner Carter.
Yeah, I just want to say I dream of the day that we'll look at the data charts that we've seen from the Public School Forum and from the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners, and we'll see that we're number one in funding. I mean, what if we were number one? Why are we happy with being third? Or why are we happy with being eighth with the per capita numbers, or 42nd in effort? We're not, right? And why don't we aspire to being first? Anyway, I want us to.
Thank you, Commissioner Howardson.
Thank you. I've just been listening, and I guess the thing that I'm left with is strategy going forth. We have these conversations every year, and what has been so missing is that with the county and the school together strategizing on how going forward. It cannot sustain, DPS or the county cannot sustain itself in the way that we're going right now. It just cannot. To put that burden on the citizens that have to pay their mortgage every year. Senior citizens right now are struggling with keeping their houses and staying in their homes. And we keep increasing the tax rate that they have to pay. So my request would be that, and I've talked to the manager, is that the school and the manager staff is together carving out what is the plan, what's the strategy going forth that we'll be able to circumvent what this whole conversation is today. That's what I'd like to see.
Thank you. Other comments? Right. I'm sorry, Ms. Lewis.
Just to reply to a couple of comments that were made during this presentation. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you, Commissioner Jacobs for acknowledging we had to find other funding sources and we need to work really hard at that. I just want to definitely uplift with, under Dr. Mbanga's leadership, we have experienced those alternative fundings, building relationships with stakeholders, and just to name one, the Bloomberg, and being able to have a 4-year early college. These are types of things we need to keep continuing to do. We also got recognized for having the greatest academic increase recovering from COVID. These are things that we really need to continue to do. It's never easy to have this conversation about which departments get cut, which is cut in funding. But I will say to you, like never before, our house is on fire. The immediate needs we have with compensation for our employees, you're talking about people walking out. This house is on fire. So I just, again, just implore, explore every avenue that we can to work together to meet the needs of those 5,000 4-year-olds who will be graduating in 2037, that we continue to meet their needs for academic growth and keeping well-qualified educators and classified staff in our system, as understanding these are emergent needs right now. Thank you.
Ms. Valladares.
If I can just echo those sentiments. It's not an understatement to say that we've been going through a lot as a district and that there are things that we can't put a price on. For example, folks who get up every morning and are happy to show up to work and feel like their employer has their back. What price do you put on that, right? And I think that conversation in terms of how to do right by our staff, it has been a conversation we've been on even before this situation happened with the salary, classified salary study. We want to do more for our people. And I think ultimately we've heard from many folks, not only through email, through calls, we've heard from them that I think as a community, we have to figure things out, county level, city level. At what point do we also urge the city to pitch in? And what are some of those conversations that can be had about additional funding, even municipalities, conversations about Duke giving money, more of their money to support education. But right now, in this moment, we have you. You hold the purse. You hold the power in this equation. And you have been on our, you have been always very receptive. And I'll say the comment that Commissioner Burns made about reaching out. I mean, there's a point at which we recognize, like, you hold the power. You are the ones who hold the funding. And so we want to be able to continue these conversations, continue to tell you what things look like. But this request right here is very much a request that is intentional. And it's a request that is more than what we've asked in previous years. But you have to understand, like, we want more, and we understand we can't ask unlimited for unlimited funds. But this amount is not an exaggeration. It is literally what we need, and that's the point of what I'm saying right now. That we need this money, and we appreciate your support and your help and your accountability and the ways that you continue to push us to follow what our previous superintendent had the vision for: collaborations, business collaborations, collaborations with academia, with universities, collaborations with philanthropies like Bloomberg. We actually got McKinsey Scott money, $18 million, and we presented on how we spent that money and how we're using that money also for growing together, right? And so growing together is happening. There's a lot happening, and we thank you for your support.
I would like to make a couple of comments if there are none, no more. I would like to acknowledge that our chair, Bettina Umstead, is on Zoom. I didn't realize she was on Zoom for so long, but she is here. And we both want to acknowledge the collaboration that has been ongoing between our bodies, and we want to continue and only build. I like the comments about increased partnerships, strategy, and long-term planning, multi-year planning around our budget. I too, like my colleagues, want to implore you to be as creative as possible. Our kids our kids need it, and they need people. They need people to surround them and take care of them. They need people who are not substitutes, who are, we need subs too. But we need, continued, persistent, stable people in their lives. That's so important in all areas, classified and certified. We heard a few weeks ago a lot of stories about from our EC teachers and our ESL teachers. And if you didn't hear that board meeting or those comments, I would invite you to go back and look at that. Even as a former teacher myself, there were things that and having seen, the contained classrooms and worked with EC teachers and ESL teachers and various parts of any school, I learned things about their experiences and what they're facing, and what they're facing right now. And we really need that consistency for our students, particularly with some of our most vulnerable kids, our EC kids, our kids who are ESL. I especially think about older immigrant children who are facing a variety of challenges coming to school. We need that support for them. We're losing them in different ways, and we can't afford to do that. And they're just such a critical and vulnerable part of our community in many ways. So I want to, thank Superintendent Moore for this very thoughtful presentation, and Ms. Hager for the context. We are clearly all struggling to do what we want to do, which is meet the needs of our community members. But I hope that we can really be creative and thoughtful in trying to do that. And I will say, just personally for me, going through the salary crisis, it was transformative for me. And I think some of that, I know people looked in on it, but I think you may feel some of that in the coming weeks, because there's understanding the budget, which we want our community members to understand the constraints that we're under. But there is just a particular energy that came out of that time to really understand what people were experiencing. It was obviously the collision of various issues. And so I just want to offer that. I see my role differently than I did a year ago as a result of that. Now stepping back into my chairing the meeting role, if there are no further comments or questions, we will move to our last presentation before public comments, the My Future NC presentation. This was also put off, so we appreciate the opportunity to hear from Mr. Brenton today, and I'll pass it to Vice Chair Burns.
Thank you for your comments. And thank you so much for your patience and waiting. And I imagine you are correct if not that, but please note that we did try to show up for y'all. And so I look forward to y'all showing up for us in the coming weeks. And also just for the public, there were 3 individuals that did mention 3 specific line items. And I'm gonna come back to that one in the news media later. But Mr. Brenton, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for bringing handouts. I know that it was emailed to everybody, much like Board Member Lewis, where she is very focused on our pre-K students and that trajectory and what it looks like to matriculate and what that 2037 class looks like. I too am thinking about that 2037 class, but on the other end of the spectrum, one of the things that I'm very proud of, not just with our board, but with this board's historic partnership with Bloomberg. I know that Durham Tech actually had a historic meeting at Bloomberg's headquarters. I think it had to be the end of last week to talk about that collaboration. A lot of the jobs that this board has brought in, whether it be Eli Lilly, Ken Power, so forth and so on, have really been great partnerships. I just toured Ken Power last week, and my proudest moment was looking at students from Durham Public Schools. Like, these were individuals that had an opportunity to do an apprenticeship, to get a certification, and now here it is, they're building the next generation of electric vehicle stations. And I just think that we need to be thinking about that as we continue to bring more jobs in. And I'm just happy that we have somebody here from My Future NC to talk about those education attainment goals that can help us reach that job placement. So thank you, sir.
Well, thank you, Vice Chair Burns, and to the joint boards for having me and giving me some time to share our work, and more importantly, how that work relates to what's happening here in Durham. I represent My Future NC as the North Central Regional Impact Manager. I serve 15 counties in the Greater Triangle. I'm one of 8 people that do that work across the state. We follow the North Carolina Department of Commerce Prosperity Zones in that work. The organization itself is a statewide nonprofit, but it's really backed by the state goal that was passed 5 years ago to try to increase educational attainment rates across the state, and to do so in really a kind of cradle to career way, but with a specific focus that I'll talk about in just a minute. You can advance the next slide. I come to the work as a former public educator. I also ran educational initiatives for the Research Triangle Foundation for a number of years, did work at Forward Cities right down the road, including the E3 Durham initiative, which is standing up Black and brown small businesses in Durham and well beyond. I've been working in Durham for 10 years in some way, shape, or form. Had a chance to cross paths with some of you, and will continue to do so. Next slide, please. So this goal, if you look at our numbers, and we've heard a lot of this projecting out to the year 2037 and even beyond, we have to take the long view. What this state is going to require, and I'm going to be brutally honest, this number is going to have to be higher than 2 million by 2030. It felt good in 2018 to say that number, but it's an embarrassment of riches in some ways and a call to action in others about what's going to be needed on a talent front. But if you look at the 25 to 44-year-old population of the state of North Carolina, which is really your key early to mid-career demographic, and you look at it broadly, we're estimating that it's going to take 2/3 of those individuals to have either a degree, a credential, or a advanced certification that's industry recognized to be successful. And success for us really does boil back to a living wage job. So it is a poverty eradication, it is a breaking of generational wealth gap eradication effort in a lot of ways, but we do it through educational attainment. Next slide, please. 3 legs to our stool. You're holding one of them in your hand, a personalized set of data that really speaks to the situation broadly around educational attainment in the county. We also do some policy work. We're not directly affiliated with the GA, but we have the ear of the GA. We present an educational report to the JLOC committee every year that talks about progress towards the goal. And then through me and the 7 other people like me who go out into the 100 counties and try to roll up sleeves and build what I'll call educational attainment ecosystems across the state. Next slide, please. So where do we sit? Well, 2 million, again, let's just work with that number. If we look at it today, we're about 391,900 off. That number is obviously constantly updating. The good news is coming out of COVID, we've had a nice recovery. But COVID really set us back. We were 40,000 behind where we needed to be coming out of COVID. And when you look at this, you start to see some similarities to what you're seeing in the profile in front of you. For those of you watching online, myfuturenc.org will have profiles for every county, including Durham, to talk about the information that our board members have before them. It's looking at the broad aspects of it, graduate degrees all the way down to less than high school and everything in between. So we've got work to do. Next slide, please. When we look at Durham specifically, I really think there's this 10-year period that's such a powerful indicator of how well a county's doing and what's to come. And this is not very different from other counties across the state. So if we start, let's look at this past August when 100 ninth graders walked in the door. Of those, we're going to see some transition out of their educational path that will result in the negative number in terms of those that actually end up with that degree or credential at the end of their cohort path. So we use a 10-year span because 6 years out of your high school graduation class is when we would hope to see a degree or a credential attained. So along the way, we're losing students to graduation, to transition to post-secondary, to persistence to their second year, and then finally to not getting that degree in 6 years. It doesn't mean you can't later. Many of us in the room, myself included, got degrees well after I was 25 years old, but we know that in order to set up early success, this is a strong indicator. So that's why we do the work. That's kind of the reason for the call to action. Next slide, please. This is the attainment profile that you have in front of you, 2 pages that capture 18 different key performance indicators, again, going from that NC pre-K level that we talked about before, all the way up through mid-career. And we have one of these, not just for every county across the state, but every school district, every workforce development board, every council, government region. So we can see this data regionally as well. And then most importantly, you'll see opportunities for growth. There's a green bar on the profile. This takes 3 of the key performance indicators out of those 18 and says there's enough of a data disparity here that these deserve special attention. No surprise, NC Pre-K stands on there, along with chronic absenteeism and math performance, which is extremely common. Chronic absenteeism is one that spiked a lot more coming out of COVID. We're having a hard time just getting our numbers back to a space that feels manageable. Next slide, please. So here's what we're looking at in Durham County. So the good news is this: back in 2018, My Future NC worked with a number of entities, the UNC system, North Carolina Community Colleges, DPI, to set numbers, hard numbers, as goals to be achieved by each county. There's 3 counties out of the 100 that have already reached their goal, and Durham County is one of them. So I hear the difficult conversations that have to happen in this room today. I want you to know that good things are happening. And it's for 2 reasons. You're drawing talent. You're doing a very good job of drawing talent, whether that is because of industry growth, and that brings people that already have that piece of paper with them. But in my 10 years experience, I know it's because also there is an educational attainment ecosystem that is growing talent locally, that is taking students that were born in Durham and helping them become part of the prosperity to come. So that's great. We still got 27.9% that we have to worry about. And we still have everybody that's not going to be 25 or to 44 years old in 2030 and younger. So those are your teenagers and down. Everybody 0 to 19 right now is not going to count in this number. And so for a Board of Education, you're hearing this as a long view, but it doesn't even affect the students that we know are going to be part of that cohort 10 years after. Next slide, please. Here's a quick snapshot that you'll see on your profile of demographic gaps. I think you can look at some intersectionality here and you can start to see some patterns. So I raised that up. Next slide, please. And here's a population that I care a great deal about because I think they fall off the radars, not just of our local school districts, but our community colleges, our workforce development boards. It is our opportunity youth cohort. These are individuals aged 16 to 24 who are currently neither in school or at work. We know that with each of these individuals, there is a broad spectrum of outcomes for them. Some of those extremely negative, which will not be beneficial to them or the society that they live in, community they live in, and some of them that can be incredibly positive. These are wide opportunity individuals. And so right now that percentage is at 9.7%. That's actually a pretty healthy percentage. You've been a little bit higher in the past, over 10. It has come down since COVID. This was a heavily COVID affected number, and the state goal that was set was 9%. Durham being what it is, I know probably wants to exceed that. So it's a question of how do we even find these individuals? And that's some of the work I'll talk about in just a minute. Next slide, please. Lastly, looking at the living wage, that number, this is reported by MIT. I know there was other statistics that kind of closely resembled it, but $49,531 is what it would take for an individual with no children to have a living wage income in this state, or sorry, in this county. Right now, only 55% of the residents have it that are aged 25 to 44. What we would hope to see that higher percentage. So it shows that on an income front, as has been evidenced today, there's work to do. Next slide. Okay, so what's happened in Durham? First off, Made in Durham has been an incredible partner of ours. They have stood up a number of initiatives that have led to kind of a magnetic draw of funding, which is putting them in a position to really be able to shepherd work at an ecosystem level. They headed up our local education attainment collaborative in 21 and 22, which was one of the few that was only county-based, focused on opportunity youth. They have now graduated into an organization called the Durham Academic Success Alliance, which Board Member Byer has been a strong contributor of. And they now stand to be this wonderful wraparound entity, because I know a lot of the conversation comes down to how does education solve for all these issues? It doesn't, and it shouldn't. It should be an ecosystem approach. It is business and industry in the chambers. It is the community-based organizations, of which Durham is ripe with, that need to really kind of formalize the wraparound services that can be provided. And that is happening. The Durham Academic Success Alliance also counts Emily K Center, Durham, obviously DPS Foundation, Student U, as a strong, connected, relationship built entity that can really now work on collective efforts. So I'm a very proud member of that, and we'll continue to advance the work that way. Next slide, please. Just very quickly pointing out that Durham Tech was in the first cohort of NC Reconnect. This is activating adult learners. We need to look across the full spectrum to make sure that not just the children of DPS, but the parents of the children of DPS are having ways to break what has been an attainment gap, a generational one, and have opportunities for 21st century careers. So there is good work happening, and I don't think it gets enough attention. Next slide. All right, so sorry, I moved very quickly. I know time is of the essence, but this term I used, I think, is so important: educational attainment ecosystems. And so you have to see economic development, workforce development, and education is really the same thing, or at least wrapped in the same wrapper. We can't separate them. We have to view them as a collective strategy, which we heard about today. Take a long-term strategy on what that's going to look like. My work is going to be to support, and it has been. I'm going to tease this, but Representative Hawkins has been working for a couple of years on a local educational attainment event. We don't have an announcement yet, but there is a planning meeting tomorrow, which should bring it into fruition and make it public. It'll happen this fall, and it'll be the first chance to really coalesce this ecosystem in tremendous ways. I will be supporting that in this county as well as the other 14 counties I do. I am going to recommend to both the Board of Commissioners and the Board of Ed to think of a new goal. We've reached that 75,000 mark. We surpassed the 75,000 mark. So what does it need to look like to call Durham really successful in the grow your own category and not just the recruit talent category? And to commit to that. And then obviously to continue to partner with us as we push forward a 100 county strategy. One of the things that will be happening in this summer is the launch of some really unique practices from our end on how educational attainment ecosystems are fostered. So last slide here coming up. I just thank you for the time and the opportunity to present this information to you. I think you don't get enough credit for the tremendous work that does happen in this county. And I think we all know the future of Durham is bright. It's just going to be a tricky thing to navigate to get there. So thank you.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate this conversation, and it is actually kind of complementing our pre-K conversation. So we have the full spectrum of our work and where we're going with our students and what we want for them. So I will invite maybe a couple minutes of comments and questions. Okay, Vice Chair Burns.
I want to start off by saying, one, thank you for coming again, but I also want to take some time to say thank you to Bettina Umstead, to Emily Chavez, and to Netta Alam. The day that we had to plan this meeting, my uncle passed away, and I was at the hospital, and they still knew how important this was for it to be on the agenda. So I appreciate them. And then they, text me and call me. Netta did, and I talked to them. So one, thank you all so much. I do hate that it was so abbreviated. There's a lot that I want to say, but we are over time. I do hope if you all get the opportunity to engage in the data and go on the website or at least sit and be in community with Brett, Commissioner Carter and I had the opportunity at Durham Tech to have like a day. And the first thing that we noticed was that they invited everybody in the prosperity zones except for the school boards. Made absolutely no sense at all so that is a reason why we wanted to have it here, because how can we talk about educational attainment and you all not be at the table? And so in my absence, I hope this conversation still goes on. And while we can't probably do all of it today, one of the, right now, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Brenton, North Carolina is ranked 25th in the nation for FAFSA completion rate, and Tennessee is ranked first. I've been to Tennessee, met with their school board, in Memphis. The reason why, it is a requirement to graduate to fill out your FAFSA in the state of Tennessee. North Carolina leaves almost $100 million a year on the table because we are not making it a requirement. We can't legally do it. It might be after I'm here. I implore this board, both these boards, to try to seek out and find a way to make it a requirement, because people know that if people know they can pay for it, if parents know they can pay for it, educational attainment becomes much more of a reality. Number two, something that we've been working on, Cecilia Holden brought this to us also, and it was, yes, I bought it forth, but this entire board agreed on last year about raising the age. One of the issues that we have, and it's not just a Durham issue, it's not just an urban issue, it's a Bertie County and a Johnston County issue. You all know better than I that kids don't think about dropping out of school at 16. They start thinking about it at 13 and they start counting the days. And so we have a contentious legislature that refuses to provide the funding for the wraparound services so that kids don't feel so dismal about it. But we were able to successfully ask the legislature, hey, can we move this forward? It was one of our legislative goals. Thank you so much to Deborah for helping us bring it forward. We were able to lobby at the North Carolina County Commissioners Association, and that was one of the few legislative goals that got out of Durham County, got out of the County Commission Association legislative, and made it to committee. And it is a bipartisan effort while working with 11 other counties, both Democrat and Republican county commissioners, because we recognize that school dropout has become abysmal in this state post-COVID. So again, in my absence on next year, I do hope that some of the numbers that you all were given will make you all think about how we can reduce the dropout rate here in Durham in particular. And so those are my comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Jacobs.
Thank you, Brett. This is really great and it's really important to have this data. I think that this issue, the bookends of the Durham pre-K, and then the career to cradle, I mean, that's what we're focused on in terms of the investments that we're making as a county. And then what happens when kids leave Durham Public Schools. We are really, I know we don't have time to talk about it here, but what we've been funding with Durham Tech, the Bowles Initiative, Made in Durham, now that you've done this Bloomberg grant with Duke Health. But we're now looking at funding another pipeline around tech. But the one thing that's in the county's manager's budget here, which you might be wondering, what is industrial extension policy for $684,000? Those are the economic incentive deals that we make with companies in RTP and Trayburn and sometimes downtown Durham for good paying jobs. And what we always include in our contracts is requirements that they work with Durham Public Schools, Durham Tech, internships, apprenticeships, because we're trying to do what we can. We look at things like how many jobs are attainable with a high school degree or an associate's degree that pay $55,000 a year starting salary with benefits. So we're really trying to create a system to support Durham Public Schools children. And so I think the more, as we have integrated Durham Pre-K into our regular meetings, I would propose that manager and superintendent that we look at even, trying to integrate into our check-ins around this issue around CTE and career development and track some of the data that is, lifted up in this report so that we can, again, work together on this, because that is the ultimate goal here, right? So I just wanted to mention some of the things that we are doing related to that.
so much. I apologize. I skipped Ms. Valladares. So back to you and then Commissioner Carter.
Thank you for this presentation. I also love the invitation to think about what's next, right? Like, we have these goals. We've attained, for the most part, like the 75% that you mentioned. What's next? And I think what's next is pipeline. We started out with pre-K, and I envision pipelines starting from, early childhood, pre-K, how to continue to think about pipelines and collaborations. And when I look at this outline that you gave us with all the different data, I do see kind of like the pipeline. I'd like to kind of see more of a visual, right? In terms of homegrown, what do we envision for our children? Durham's prized, Durham's future, Durham's jewels. And I'm gonna tell you what I envision. I envision, somebody going through Durham Public Schools, first of all, pre-K, right? Early childhood pre-K, Durham Public Schools. And then, we have institutions here. And I know that you mentioned there's some numbers here about where do they choose to go to college. But I envision a vision of supporting our HBCU as well, like those collaborations with North Carolina Central University, the different colleges. I envision also that if we do have students who graduate and decide not to pursue post-secondary education, that they still leverage these opportunities to come back. And you mentioned that in terms of adult learners. That is a very important thing, especially for the state's Project Kitty Hawk initiative. And I don't know to what point Project Kitty Hawk will also be featured, because if you know, North Carolina Central University, NCCU, is actually one of the participating institutions. Yeah, so I just, my comment, and if you want to share anything about that, but I think that just seeing that pipeline and seeing like all the different ways that we continue to uphold education and opportunities for people to get their degrees and therefore get quality of life, which you also showed in the presentation in terms of the outlook for folks.
Yeah, great points. I think the key is lowering the fruit. It doesn't really matter the category. Dr. Spell is going to think about NC pre-K all the time, right? There's very few people that have Superintendent Moore's universal lens on everything that's happening, really pre-K to 12, right? And maybe even beyond, depending on the partnerships that DPS has, right? So we have to kind of either train the generalists who are going to think broad ecosystem wide, or connect the verticals, the Dr. Chappelle's, and then who's focused on early literacy, like Durham Literacy Center, and really create first off community and then dialogue, so that there's an understanding of where the weak points are. And then what we can do is just, we're looking for the low hanging fruit. So just lower the fruit, right? Let's put a little weight on the trees and bring the fruit down, so that there are opportunities for adult learners to go for online education through Project Kitty Hawk or through NC Reconnect and be found by a Durham Tech because they took a class in 1996, but never finished a degree. Or the FAFSA piece, right? So that we are looking at $125 million that gets left on the table every year by the state in Pell Grants alone. Forget scholarships, Pell Grants alone. So that's low hanging fruit. Let's push it down and make sure that it gets at least access. Then you can start to get that comprehensive picture and say, all right, what are the deficiencies? What's left? Is it literacy? Is it absenteeism? What's left? So spot on. Mm-hmm.
All right.
Mic on.
Oh,
Your
Commissioner
mic.
Carter, your mic, yeah.
Never mind what I already said. I'll just jump to what I thought was the most helpful. My eyes keep gravitating toward the top opportunities for growth. And last thing you said is what I can't get out of my head, which is the chronic absenteeism. I don't feel like we talk enough about that. And can we solve that? And that's one of the things that's lifted up here. If we solve that, the math performance will probably go up. We're working really hard on NC pre-K enrollment. We're going to keep at it forever until we achieve our goals. Do you have examples of things that are going on in other counties to combat the absenteeism issue that would be instructive for us?
I would call this a COVID influence number, just in the sense that this data came from 2022. So you're still tail end of COVID there in terms of trying to get to a recovery point. I don't know what it looks like in the tail end of a 2023, 2024 school year.
I bet it's not zero, of course.
It's not zero.
So, but
It's probably not close to where we'd like to see it. So so with that point made, I think as a former educator, relevance of education is so important. Like if a student does not see their path, it leads to the dropout piece as well. If a student does not see their path beyond elementary, beyond middle, into high school, where they really start to form identity with an academic and a career mindset, we're in trouble. And I've seen those kids in my classrooms. I didn't really know as an early teacher how to navigate that. And keep in mind, it's in a culture where everything we just talked about with teachers leaving the profession, coming in under-equipped to be able to handle the pressures. But the relevance of education, the educational experience is going to be important. That's where work-based learning can come into play, I think. There's apprenticeship and internship opportunities. It's experiential. The more experiential some of these career fields can be, it demystifies them for kids. Right now, it might seem in their mind like just a destination they can't reach. So we want to shorten that, increase confidence around their ability to do that. And that's happening. That's been the 21st century in education. We've just seen this slow blend of the workforce and the educational experience come together, and it will continue to. That's the only thing, in my opinion, that's the biggest thing, in my opinion, that's going to close that gap.
Yeah, that, and maybe if we did have, the ability to invest more in folks at the school level, looking at the numbers, and as soon as someone's missed 10% of however many days have been in school, I don't know, try to intervene and prevent it from getting any worse. But there again, it requires humans in the building. So,
Yeah, I just, as a former assistant principal as well, that happens. I don't know many schools where that doesn't happen. It's just a hard thing. Tracking them is one thing. Calling it out as we have an issue here is one thing, but yep. Yep. And then we get to the guidance counselor percentage, which I think in Durham County is above, 286 to 1. So, your counselors are dealing with tremendous ratios and trying to build relationships with these kids, increase that confidence.
rigor, relevance, and relationship. Remember that?
Yeah,
That was
big time.
20 years ago.
Yeah.
You just said it again.
This one was cutting teeth. That's right. Yeah.
All right. We'll do hopefully a couple more comments and then probably wrap up here. Ms. Rogers.
In terms of the absenteeism, it is something that DPS looks at already. Our social workers are doing an excellent job in some of that work, in a lot of that work. We do need support from other folks. We are no longer doing truancy court to help connect families with resources. We have to start doing some of that work. There's some community partners who are interested, including JB Buxton from Durham Tech, because an absenteeism problem for us becomes an absenteeism problem for him. And so there's actually really good work being done in our schools. We just need to pay closer attention to the data, make sure we're calling on all the resources that are at our disposal, Madam District Attorney. And we just need some support from the whole community. And that's where we are. We just, we got to get those letters out and let people know that there is this law about this, and that it matters. We all have to work together. You got to show up for work. You got to show up for your collegiate courses or you aren't going to pass. And you will be more successful when you're connected to school. And keeping students connected to school is not easy. It's not easy for parents. It's not easy for social workers. It's not easy for educators, but it's going to take all of us together to do it. And probably some funding put behind it too. But the foundation is also interested in joining that cause.
Ms.
I'm proud of you. I ain't never heard you say nothing like that.
Ms.
Nobody caught the dog whistle.
Ms.
I hope you know.
On public record, Ms. Byer.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Commissioner Burns for having this brought here to our agenda. It's so important. And thank Brett for joining the Academic Success Alliance as a steadfast volunteer. I think Commissioner Burns will be excited to know that one of the recommendations from that group was, do we make a FAFSA completion of high school graduation requirement for students in Durham? Do we make a Durham Tech application a requirement for graduation? And frankly, one of the things that group is waiting to hear the most, Superintendent Moore, is, and I know everyone's struggling across the state, is what do we do with this 3-year graduation law that the General Assembly has passed that makes districts require us to offer an accelerated option when actually in Durham, we prefer students to stay in and get as many credits and coursework and free education as they can from the school district and from connections with Durham Tech. So I just look forward to ways that we can do best in Durham and model what is best for children.
All right. And I'm just gonna add, our chair is, reminding me, to just remind everybody else, and Ms. Rogers kind of touched on it, but we have a partnership with the Conflict Resolution Center to address absenteeism. I do think it's something we'll need to continue to focus on, especially past or post-COVID. All right, well, thank you so much, Mr. Brenton. We appreciate you being here. Thank you, Vice Chair Burns, for bringing this presentation to us. There are no public comments. And so with that, we thank everyone for attending, and we are adjourned.